Well, the Victorian coalition's preparing to hand down its reply to the state budget after the Andrews government unveiled new taxes, including a COVID levy, to help pay down more than $170 billion in net debt. Well, the man who'll be delivering that reply early next week is the Shadow Treasurer in Victoria, Brad Rowsell, and I'm pleased to say he joins us now live in the Melbourne studio. Mr Rowsell, appreciate your time.
Always great to chat, Simon.
So it's been a big week. Obviously, the budget papers have come down. We were just chatting off air. You only get 75 minutes to digest these things before they actually become public. What was the biggest shock to you in these papers?
The big shock for me was the new taxes. I mean, we've got a new schools tax in this budget. We've got a new tax on jobs. We've got a new tax on rent. And we've got a tax on aspiration. You know, those Victorians who just want to do their very best, be their very best, do the best they can for their family to give their kids the best start they possibly can in life are going to be affected by the new tax measures in this budget. And all because the Andrews Labor government have racked up this debt-fuelled spending year on year, wasted billions of dollars, and now every Victorian's paying the price of that.
Do you recognise the need, though, to pay down some of this debt, and it may require this sort of tax on business?
Yeah, look, so I don't concede that there needs to be a tax on business. In fact, I think that we should be partnering.
But how do you pay down this debt?
Well, we start by reducing waste. I mean, they've got no plan and no guarantee to the Victorian people that over the last 9 years have wasted more than $30 billion on major projects. They've got no plan to say that that won't happen again in the future. And just look at these tax measures, Simon, that over the next 10 years will rack in about $31 billion, so they say, of additional income for the state. But the net debt's still $170 billion. So by their own admission, they have no plan to pay off $140 billion of debt. We've got more to do, and they have no aspiration to actually roll out the red carpet to the private sector, to partner with the private sector, to grow the economic pie, to grow the economic opportunity, to grow jobs in this state through private sector co-investment.
But apart from cutting down on so-called waste in major projects, how else can Victoria pay off this debt without more taxes, more revenue coming in?
Well, there's $76 billion of liabilities in the budget that actually haven't been allocated as yet. I characterised that yesterday as the Premier-in-Waiting's slush fund. I mean, she's the minister responsible for major projects, and you know, I know that there's an active conversation in the caucus, in the Labor caucus at the moment, that says, you know, who's going to be Premier after Premier Andrews? And Jacinta Allen is in the box seat. There's $76 billion of unallocated funds there, which I'm sure that Jacinta, over the next few weeks, the few months until Premier Andrews leaves, will be dishing out to shore up her support within the caucus.
I think I read in budget paper 2 or 5, though, that some of those liabilities relate to the floods, relate to compulsory acquisitions potentially for projects, relate also to court action that the state government may find, though.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't
Aren't they fair liabilities for the state to have and at least bring to book if they are
And I don't disagree with having some liabilities there in the budget, but $76 billion of unattributed liabilities in the state budget is half of our net debt expected over the next 4 years. So I think if we should have learned something as a state over the last little while, it's that there should be greater transparency, greater openness when it comes to major project spending, and the fact that nearly half the net debt is $76 billion of unattributed funding in the budget. Surely the government should be more transparent about that.
Do you believe that there could be a broader reforming of the stamp duty system? At the moment, the government wants to take away stamp duty for commercial, industrial properties. Why not go that step further and reform it for residential properties so that, you know, if someone's out there trying to buy their first home, they're not having to pay up front so much money to the government?
Well, unlike Labor, Simon, we haven't risen the white flag when it comes to home ownership in this state. We want more Victorians in homes. We think having a roof over your head, having your own home, is actually the foundation and the thing that people need to actually contribute back to a community. And so...
Does that translate to getting rid of stamp duty?
And that translates to, at the last election, we took a policy that said we'll remove stamp duty for first home buyers. I think that's not a bad place to start. My new, enthusiastic, very well-versed colleague, Jess Wilson, the Shadow Minister for Home Ownership and the new member for Q, who's doing a sensational job in this space. And I will be working very closely together on these matters. Clearly, the current circumstance is a disincentive for young Victorians to purchase their own part of this great state, and we want to make it easier.
Have you heard from any private schools in Victoria as to whether they've been informed by the government that they'll have to pay more payroll tax as a result of measures in this budget?
So just so everyone understands what we're talking about, this is Labor's new tax on schools because they've racked up.
They call it the lifting of the payroll tax-free threshold.
Yeah, but how confusing, because what is actually going to be a result of this is that parents are going to be paying more fees. Parents who can...
told you that already?
Yeah, they have. Yeah, and they estimate that additional fee to be between $800 and $1,000 per kid. Now, one of those schools who's on the government's hit list is the school that I went to, the secondary school that I went to, St Bede's College in Mentone. And I was at a 20-year anniversary with the fellas just this week, and I looked around the room and I thought to myself, could families of these fellas have afforded an additional $1,000 in school fees? And my answer is that they absolutely couldn't. You know, I know that there are families in that room and families who send their kids to school today who are working 1, 2, 3 jobs, who are taking the second shift in the taxi just to make ends meet. So this threshold, this new tax on schools, tax on education, kicks in at $7,500. We're not talking about, you know, schools with $35,000 fees or $30,000 fees. We're talking about, you know, really low school fees. And because of the way that the Andrews Labor government has managed the budget, they're coming after kids, they're coming after schools, they're coming after families at a time when they can least afford it. And that's just one of the insidious measures in this budget.
So do you know if the schools have been notified yet? Like your old schools, have they been notified yet?
Not formally by the government. In fact, what I have heard...
They should be?
Well, you know, that's what we're doing at the moment, right? So what the government should have done...
put a figure on how many schools there are here. You think they'd have an idea?
Yeah, look, there's about 110 across the state, and that means that the cost of education is going to go up. And look, you know, there's going to be a bit of choice here. If families can't afford $800 to $1,000 in additional school fees per year, per kid, do you know what they're going to do? They're going to pull their kid out of an independent education, and it's not just the elite private schools, Simon. It's the Catholic schools, it's the Islamic schools, it's community schools that will be affected by that. And they're going to take their kid and they're going to go and line up at the local state school. So if the government thinks that by imposing this tax on schools, they're going to just solve their, you know, the COVID debt that's of their creation, they're simply not. They're going to be charged more for it because there are going to be more kids and more families lining up in state schools just to be educated.
Next week, you'll have a shadow cabinet meeting on Monday and then go to the party room and decide on which sort of measures you'll support and will not support in the budget. Can you tell us whether you'll try and block any of these measures in the upper house particularly?
There is a process to follow, unlike the government who just simply imposes these new tax measures on communities without their notice, without notification, without consultation. What we've been doing since Tuesday is using 2 ears and 1 mouth in proportion and listening to those communities that are affected. Just before I came into studio today, I was actually sitting down in my parliamentary office working through what my recommendation to Shadow Cabinet on Monday will be.
Can you give us a sense of what some of that is?
Well, we're hearing what you're hearing, and we're hearing that the impact of these changes are significant and are untenable. And so, you know, I'll take my recommendation to Shadow Cabinet. I'll have that conversation with my colleagues, and we'll do this in a measured and a principled way, one that respects our opportunity, our obligation to speak to those most affected.
So you might try and block some of this in the upper house?
We'll take it to Shadow Cabinet.
Yes.
We'll take it to Shadow Cabinet on Tuesday. Look, Simon, the impact of these changes is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's hurting families, it's hurting young singles, it's hurting older Victorians at a time they can least afford it. And for a government who says that they govern for all, frankly, they don't. They're pitting those who send their kids to independent schools against those who send their kids to state schools. They're pitting those who are renting against those who are landlords. They're pitting small business against medium business. This isn't a budget that brings Victorians together. It's a budget that separates Victorians, that tears Victorians apart.
Do you feel relieved finally that the opposition's had a week where it's not being focused on its own internals?
As we've discussed before, Simon, my 100% focus for some time now has been the impact of Victoria's economy on Victorians. That continues to be my
But
focus,
that's a
and I'm
final
thrilled.
redeeming effect.
I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled, that that's the focus of my colleagues as well.
Just on another matter, your coalition counterparts, the Nationals, have today voted to support the No campaign when it comes to the Voice. Now, John Pesciuto, your leader in the Liberals, has given your MPs a free vote, essentially, on this. Where do you personally stand on the Voice? Will you support the Indigenous Voice Department?
Just like I have been given a free vote, courtesy of my party, and just like every Victorian, every Australian, when information comes around and when we have a date, I'll consider the matter, myself in the privacy of my own home and cast my vote and post it back via Australia Post to whoever counts the votes. Simon.
You might be going off to a schools for a ballot, potentially, like an election.
Yeah, look, what I'd like to see is that the life experience of Indigenous Australians improved by any measure that's considered by the federal government. And I'll be frank, from what I've seen so far, I can't actually see a direct correlation between the federal government's campaign and the improvement of lives for Indigenous Australians. And so I do have some question marks which haven't been resolved in my own head.
All right, so we'll look out for that one, no doubt. Brad Rowsell, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.
No worries.